Welcome back to Pokemon Episode Summaries. Today, I'm doing episode 364, Garden of Eating. The episode begins with Ash and the gang on their way to Lily Cove City, when in the middle of nowhere, they're just walking down a random-ass path, when they see a huge banner sign with a bunch of Slackoth munching on bananas on it. Max was the first one to bring everyone's attention to the sign, since he was intrigued by seeing Slackoth, since he'd been around them for a while, due to knowing his dad's Slackoth. Brock assumes that this sign wasn't just up for no reason, it had to have been advertising something, so he checks his guidebook for anything related to the sign, and found a page advertising the Banana Slackoth Garden, and came to the conclusion that that must have been what this sign was advertising as well. Brock also found out that it was nearby, and was essentially a habitat for Slackoth who loved bananas. Basically, any Slackoth who loved bananas was drawn to this little garden that somewhat acted as a theme park. Since the owner of the garden allowed people to come see all the Slackoth who loved to eat bananas, and Brock also read that apparently the garden had the largest population of Slackoth in the entire world, in one location. It wasn't just Max who was interested in going now. Brock wanted to see what the hype with all these bananas were about, and Ash wanted to see another Slackoth and compare it to Norman's. So the gang officially decided to go there, but was stopped by May, who was more interested in getting some ice cream in the next town immediately. Max gets pissed off at this, and the two start to argue, and Brock gets annoyed by this argument, so he interrupts it as May was going on and on about how it wasn't even worth it to check out the garden by showing her a page in his guidebook that showed a whole bunch of recipes that were made with the bananas in the garden, including banana splits and ice cream. The ice cream particularly excited May, as she envisioned herself eating every single bit of it, and she agreed to go there. So, they set off, with May admitting that it actually would be fun to go there now. And as they walk to the garden, May borrows Brock's guidebook for a little bit, and drools over all of the banana treats on the recipe page, and plans what she was going to eat as soon as she got there, extremely excited, leading Ash to question how May would be able to stomach so much dessert after they just had lunch before the episode started. Eventually, after a few minutes, Ash and the gang arrived at an entrance to a big jungle-like reserve, and they saw a sign at the top of the entrance gate to it that resembled the sign from earlier, having Slackoth eating bananas, and they knew that they were at the right place. Although, unfortunately, the gate was closed, so they couldn't get inside. It was basically like a jail cell, like jail cell bars, keeping them out. Ash leans on the gate in an attempt to try and get it open, and, he was trying to, open the bars, but to Ash's surprise, it actually opened, and May was the first one to eagerly go inside, not even questioning how it opened, going on and on about how much banana desserts she was going to eat in one sitting. Although, when they entered, even Pikachu, who looked around, noticed that there was no one inside to greet them, which was odd since, there was advertisement for the place, so it must have been open, or it should have been open anyways. And also, weirdly, as they continued to walk, May was disappointed by the fact that there was no bananas anywhere, and Max was disappointed by the fact that there was no Slackoth anywhere either. Ash and the gang's disappointment is interrupted when they get frightened by a very loud rumbling noise shaking the entire garden area. The gang was so terrified they couldn't even move, and they only got more scared when they feared an earthquake was about to begin, as they felt some pounds underneath them, and they saw the ground start to crack. Just then, though, a young man comes running to their rescue, stating that they had to come with him immediately, and not wanting to die, the gang obliges, following the man to a small house, which he introduced as the reception office for his place, that he admitted did resemble a restaurant. Which made sense, because there had to be some place to make the desserts. Anyways, now that Ash and the gang were safe and just out of breath, the man introduced himself as Marcel and explained that the reason why the garden was closed was because there was some trouble going on. He was going to show them the trouble, but he waited a little bit until the earthquake rumbling had calmed down, and once it did, he escorted Ash and the gang to the window of the office, where a sleeping Snorlax was seen right outside, laying down. Since this was May's first time seeing a Snorlax, she looked it up in the Pokédex, and Marcel explained that the cause of all the trouble going on had been Snorlax, since it had been scaring all the Slackoth away and gobbling up all the bananas. And, of course, this made Ash and the gang realize why they didn't see any bananas or Slackoth. The place wasn't a fraud. Snorlax was just messing everything up. Marcel then began to vent, explaining that everything was good, but then Snorlax just suddenly showed up one day and ate all the bananas, to the point where no bananas would be left to feed the Slackoth. And Marcel elaborated that Snorlax would go to sleep and then wake up and then eat and then go back to sleep and then repeat this process time and time again. It just would not stop eating the bananas. And Marcel also added the reason for the Slackoth's disappearance. Some of them were frightened by the Snorlax for sure, and that's why they were running away or hiding without having a chance to eat the bananas. But there was also some Slackoth who had gone to the furthest corner of the garden to protect the few bananas that remained. So some of them were still ready to fight back, but all they could do was really protect. According to a depressed Marcel, Snorlax was even causing trouble while it was asleep, since its snoring would cause the ground to start shaking, and just its weight in general would cause the ground to shake. Brock and Ash were confused by the fact that Snorlax wasn't in the mountains, as Brock pointed out that Snorlax usually lived in the mountains, not foothill areas like the garden. As we see some of the Slackoth trying to protect the remaining bananas from Snorlax, Marcel explains that the reason why Snorlax was in his garden was probably because a large building project began about a month ago on the mountain, so that probably displaced Snorlax from his original home, so he was looking for a new place to go. Marcel then revealed that he's been working on a plan to try and get rid of Snorlax to save his garden and the remaining bananas, but he couldn't think of what to do. Ash then suggested that he could help, since he's dealt with Snorlax issues back in Kanto and the Orange Islands. Alright, so the anime is admitting they just repeat plotlines, but anyways, Ash also revealed that not only did he deal with the Snorlax in the Orange Islands, but he also caught one in the Orange Islands. May and Max were shocked by this, not knowing that Ash had a Snorlax, but they believed that since Ash owned it, he must have been able to control it pretty well, so they had hope that he would be able to control this Snorlax. Brock confirmed that Ash could control his Snorlax pretty well, recalling that he met Ash's Snorlax when he used it in the Sumo tournament and the Johto League, even though he wasn't with Ash's gang when he first caught it in the Orange Islands. Marcel asked where Ash's Snorlax was, leading him to reveal that it was at Professor Oak's lab. Somehow, Marcel knew of Professor Oak. We don't know if he actually knew him or if he knew of him, but either way, if Ash knew Professor Oak, he figured that Ash must have been a pretty decent trainer, and if Ash had truly managed to capture a Snorlax, then he trusted that Ash, as well as his friends, were worthy enough to help him save the Slakoth from it, and he requested that they help. And since Ash was the one who initially offered to help, he agreed in a heartbeat, and his friends agreed as well, not wanting to be left out. Upon hearing how eager Ash and the gang were to help, Marcel started crying with joy. Meanwhile, Team Rocket had made their way into the garden on a tree to spy on Ash and the gang, but by the time they made it to the garden, Ash and the gang were already in the office, so they didn't see Ash and the gang, but as they looked through their binoculars, they did see the sleeping Snorlax. Upon seeing it, Meowth obviously came up with a plan to give Snorlax to Giovanni, and had a boss fantasy about how he would deliver it. Basically, we see a fantasy of Giovanni sleeping, and then Meowth ends up delivering Snorlax in a huge box as a good morning present for Giovanni, assuming he would like Snorlax to wake him up every morning and would have no fear of it trampling his house. As to wake Giovanni up every morning and, get the sleep out of his eyes, Snorlax would put him on his shoulder and take him on an adventure through the wilderness until they reached a beautiful view, and that would motivate Giovanni to work hard all day. Jesse and James at first made fun of Meowth for how detailed his fantasy was, but they agreed with the base of the fantasy, which was that they should just steal Snorlax and give it to Giovanni. So the three of them cheered, having come up with a plan to steal Snorlax. With Team Rocket being particularly interested in Snorlax because they believed it was pretty rare, and Wobbuffet popped out of the Pokeball to agree with this. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang and Marcel inside of the office. While they were coming up with a plan to deal with Snorlax, Marcel suggested that they keep an eye on Snorlax from multiple angles at the same time by using the security cameras deeper in his office. And Marcel proceeded to show Ash and the gang all of the security cameras, and they all kept an eye on Snorlax, who was still sleeping, while they come up with a plan. May suggested that they should scare Snorlax awake and get it to leave, but Brock countered this, saying that they would likely need something pretty big and scary to scare something like Snorlax, and they didn't have anything big and scary at their disposal. Ash and the gang's planning was briefly interrupted as they heard another huge pound, and Marcel told Ash and the gang to just ignore that, since he heard shit like that all the time, and it was likely just Snorlax rolling over in his sleep. So Marcel really wasn't startled after all. Ash then suggests that they should battle the Snorlax and help get rid of it out of the garden by capturing it in a Pokeball, being very confident in himself that if he caught a Snorlax once before, he could do it again. Although Brock reminded Ash that Snorlax regained health when it was asleep, so it could just fall back asleep right after Ash tried to attack it and weaken it to capture it, so capturing it would be very hard. Just then, though, Ash saw no reason to not implement his plan immediately, since there was no better plan, when Max and May both noticed on the security cameras that Snorlax had actually woken up. That was what the pounding sound was. It wasn't Snorlax rolling over in its sleep, it was it waking up, and now it was eating the remaining bananas. Ash was already gone by the time the others had realized he was gone, so even though they would have stopped him, they decided to just follow him, as Ash ran outside to challenge the Snorlax. Just as Ash and the gang and Marcel arrived at Snorlax, Snorlax had already eaten the bananas that it was eating before, and had now made it to the spot where the Slakoth were hiding out, guarding the rest of the bananas. Ash instantly demands Snorlax to stop what he was doing, but Snorlax doesn't listen, and it also doesn't listen when May, Max, Brock, and Marcel beg it to stop. So Ash challenges it to a battle and threatens to capture it in a Pokeball, but Snorlax didn't even seem to care about this, as it simply continued eating, so Ash started to battle Snorlax without its consent, having Pikachu use Thunderbolt, which causes a huge explosion and surrounds Snorlax with smoke. But once the smoke cleared, they found Snorlax completely uninjured, still just eating bananas, eating one bunch in one gulp. Everyone was in complete shock at this, especially May, who commented how fucking bananas this whole situation was, leaving Max, Brock, and Marcel annoyed by May's bad pun, with Max telling May just how fucking bad that pun was, although May responds that she couldn't resist making a banana pun, since all that was on her mind was the bananas that were being eaten, because if Snorlax ate all the bananas, then she wouldn't be able to have any banana desserts, and this just made Max and Brock sigh in disappointment, as they were actually trying to come up with a plan to stop Snorlax here, and all May was focusing on was the fact that all the bananas were being eaten. Ash then comes up with a plan, since he wasn't distracted at all by May's bad pun, and has Pikachu strike with Iron Tail, but just like the Thunderbolt, it did no damage whatsoever. And Snorlax simply continued to eat bananas. And suddenly, Snorlax leaned back with its mouth open. Ash assumed that it might have been done eating and was about to sleep again, so he figured that the battle could potentially be easier now. Even though Snorlax could heal itself up when it fell asleep, because as long as Snorlax couldn't defend itself, Ash figured that the healing would be useless. Although Brock was more aware of what Snorlax was actually doing, and warned Ash that Snorlax was actually acknowledging that Ash was battling it and was about to strike back with a yawn. Since Ash's mind was already set on Snorlax going to sleep, when Brock mentioned yawn, he thought that this just was Brock agreeing with him that Snorlax was going to go to sleep, not the move yawn. So when Ash noticed that Snorlax hadn't fallen asleep, he questioned what was going on. But just before he could get his full question out, Snorlax used Yawn, releasing a line of pink bubbles, and this puts Ash and Pikachu to sleep once they were hit by said bubbles, as they get fatigued and drowsy and collapse on the ground and doze off. Brock tried to explain to Ash that the effect of the yawn caused drowsiness, but Ash was already asleep, so he, Max, and May tried their best to shake Ash and Pikachu awake, with Brock and May focusing on Ash, and Max focusing on Pikachu. But Snorlax's yawn bubbles end up hitting them as well, and the three of them fall asleep too. Marcel panics and tries to get away, but before Marcel could, he gets hit by the bubbles as well, and falls asleep. Snorlax then takes a big breath of relief, happy that its disturbance to its sleep was dealt with, as it then falls down to the ground and goes back to sleep as well. Meanwhile, Team Rocket were flying over the garden, now in their Meowth balloon that had a claw attached to the bottom to grab Snorlax, which Meowth was controlling with a lever, and he assured Jessie and James that the claw would be strong enough to pull even the weight of Snorlax into the Meowth balloon. Before they could capture it, though, they had to find it, and luckily for them, they found it, and they cheered immensely, because they saw that not only Snorlax was sleeping, but Ash and the gang were sleeping next to it, along with Marcel, so they should be able to capture Pikachu as well, without any difficulties. Jessie and James got so excited about this that they figured they would get promoted, in the sense they would get both Pikachu and Snorlax for Giovanni, and imagine the new uniforms they would have upon getting promoted. So, Meowth gently lowers the claw at Snorlax, trying his best not to wake it up. But what Team Rocket didn't know was even though Snorlax was asleep, it was able to still sense stuff while it was asleep, and it sensed the claw, and it used Yawn to unleash more pink bubbles, and just as the claw was an inch away from Snorlax, these pink bubbles caused Meowth to stop operating the claw as he fell asleep, and Jessie and James fell asleep as well, with both Jessie and James slumping over the Meowth balloon, and Meowth joining them. To make matters worse, while Meowth was asleep, he accidentally lets go of the control that was operating the claw, which causes him to lose control of it as it goes back up to the Meowth balloon so fast. The claw goes back up so fast that it ends up slamming into the Meowth balloon's burner, which explodes the balloon and sends Team Rocket blasting off. Although they don't blast off far, as they blow up, they blast off onto a tree in the garden and fall off this tree and land in a bush near Ash and the gang, Snorlax and Marcel. Even after all that noise, Team Rocket, nor Ash and the gang and Marcel, nor Snorlax woke up. A few hours later, Ash and the gang and Marcel had woken up, so they decided that they should call Professor Oak to see if he knew how to deal with the Snorlax and shit like that. So they went back into Marcel's office and called him on a computer screen that Marcel happened to have. Ash explains the situation, and Oak reacted with surprise that they were all hit by a yawn attack, although he laughs about this. He thought it was pretty fucking funny that they were defeated by a simple yawn. Ash and the gang were a little embarrassed that Oak was laughing at them, so Max begged Ash to change the subject of the conversation by bringing up the Snorlax that Ash said he had, and Max revealed that he wanted to see Ash's Snorlax to make sure he was telling the truth. So Ash asked Oak to see his Snorlax. So Oak calls Snorlax over and says that Snorlax was doing pretty well and was in very healthy condition. Ash happily greets his Snorlax, and then Oak feeds it a Pokéblock, and it reveals that he had been feeding it specially made Snorlax Pokéblocks designed to satisfy a Pokemon like Snorlax with a super large appetite. Since they were designed to expand even after they'd been consumed, so they could technically provide more nutrients even after they were already eaten. Ash and the gang responded that they knew everything about Pokéblocks already, and were glad to see that Oak was feeding it some, because it was clearly going to help it out, because Pokéblocks were awesome. Oak then revealed his idea to help deal with the Snorlax, which was sending Ash and the gang through email the recipe to the special Snorlax Pokéblocks so that they could feed it to that Snorlax and his appetite would be fully satisfied, so he wouldn't eat the bananas anymore. Ash and the gang liked this plan, but then Oak realized that even if they satisfied Snorlax's appetite, it still would be hoarding up the garden and it wouldn't leave. And Oak suggested that Ash and the gang would still have to catch Snorlax in a Pokeball to make it leave the area. Ash simply suggested having his own Snorlax battle the Snorlax in the garden, and asked Oak to send it over so that they could battle, because, Ash thought that his Snorlax would be able to rival the other Snorlax in terms of strength. Although Oak clarified that Ash couldn't battle with his Snorlax right now, because it had to wait in between meals to battle, and he had just fed it some more Pokeblocks. Ash sighed, panicking about what to do, since, he didn't know how to defeat Snorlax, though Oak had another idea up his sleeve, as he suggested a decent way to counter Snorlax's yawn attack would be to use a Pokemon with an ability such as a Vital Spirit or Insomnia, so it wouldn't be able to fall asleep. Admitting that otherwise, Snorlax's combination of moves with Yawn and Rest, or it could heal itself, would make Snorlax undefeatable. Seeing as Max was the expert of the group, Ash and the gang turned to him to ask if he knew of any Pokemon nearby that they could use that had the Vital Spirit ability, or the Insomnia ability, and Max stated that even though he was an expert, he didn't need to be an expert to know that Vigoroth had Vital Spirit since he had grown up with the Vigoroth that his dad owned. At first, Ash wondered how they could use a Vigoroth when they didn't have, any Vigoroth at the garden, but Max reminded Ash that even though he was thinking of his dad's, they didn't need to go all the way back to Petalburg to get a Vigoroth, since the Slakoth evolved into Vigoroth, and since there were so many goddamn Slakoths in this garden, there had to be at least one that was close to evolving into a Vigoroth. Sure enough, Marcel revealed that he had actually been training the leader Slakoth, that was, the main leader of the entire Slakoth group, and now he was at pretty high level, so it should only really need one or two more battles to evolve. So, with that, Ash and the gang officially came up with their plan to evolve this lead Slakoth into Vigoroth, and then defeat and capture Snorlax with it. So, Ash and the gang said goodbye to Oak and set off outside of the office, eventually making their way, thanks to Marcel's lead, to the Slakoth's hiding place, where they were hiding the remainder of the bananas. Marcel and Ash and the gang stood by some benches as Marcel called out for the lead Slakoth to come out, though the leader Slakoth, and all the other Slakoth for that matter, seemed very hesitant to come out, scared that Snorlax was nearby. So Marcel then demanded that the lead Slackoth come out because Marcel had a plan to get rid of the Snorlax, but he needed the Slackoth's help, adding that all of the other Slackoth could help as well if they wanted, by all means, but the main one he needed was the leader. All the Slackoth were still extremely hesitant. They dealt with enough stress and pain from dealing with the Snorlax all day, and they were too scared to even move and even think about challenging the Snorlax. So this leads Marcel to explain the plan in a little more detail, stating that he needed the help of the leader to evolve into a Vigoroth so that it could take on Snorlax in a battle, adding that once it was a Vigoroth, it would have the ability it needed to challenge Snorlax to rival it. The Slackoth were surprised by all this, and the leader was a little nervous still, not wanting to put its life at risk, although the rest of the Slackoth encouraged it. Ash and the gang encouraged it as well, telling the Slackoth that it could help preserve the garden and allow it to become a safe place for everyone. The leader was still hesitant, but all the other Slackoth were basically explaining to it that they really trusted it to protect the garden, and it took a lot of convincing, so much convincing, to the point where Marcel was losing hope, about to give up on stopping the Snorlax, thinking that there was no way the Slackoth would come out. Slackoth suddenly jumped out of the bushes, the leader one, with a stronger and braver than ever attitude. It was ready to battle Snorlax, or at least evolve into Vigoroth. It was going to try. The leader Slackoth then comes up to Marcel, and Marcel thanks the Slackoth for cooperating and hugs it, crying with joy. Once Marcel had stopped crying, the two stopped hugging, and Marcel informed it that it was time for its training to begin. And all the other Slackoth watched from behind the bushes as the training started, with Marcel asking Ash to send out some of his Pokémon so that Slackoth could battle against them to evolve. Ash obliged and first sent forth his Pikachu to battle it, having it use Quick Attack, although Slackoth literally countered with Counter and knocked Pikachu back before the Quick Attack could get off. Good thing they were only just battling in front of the office, because otherwise, with the sheer strength the Slackoth displayed to slap Pikachu out of the way, Pikachu may have damaged the garden. As May, Max, and Brock watch the battle, impressed with Slackoth's strength, Ash sends out his Torkoal and has it use Flamethrower, but Slackoth easily dodges it to practice its speed. So Ash sends out his Grovyle next and has it use a Leaf Blade, but Slackoth stops the Leaf Blade by scratching the Grovyle, knocking it to the ground. Eventually, Torkoal, Pikachu, and Grovyle all took on Slackoth at once, and they all got their ass beat, as Slackoth got stronger and stronger and stronger. And once Torkoal, Grovyle, and Pikachu were all defeated, just as Ash and Marcel had hoped, Slackoth finally evolved into Vigoroth. So now, Ash and gang cheered with joy, congratulating Marcel, though Marcel wasn't cheering yet, even though he was happy to have a Vigoroth, as he remembered what had to be done. Just because they had a Vigoroth doesn't mean the battle would be easy, it was just possible to win now. They had to find Snorlax. So, without further ado, Ash and the gang and Marcel managed to locate Snorlax in a nearby grove in the garden, snacking on a whole bunch of bananas again, eating all the bunches in one single gulp. Marcel instantly announces to Snorlax the evolution of one of his Slackoth into a Vigoroth, and challenges it to a rematch with it, and he sends it into fight, but Snorlax goes in for the first attack, opening its mouth to go for a yawn, but Vigoroth just pops the yawn bubbles and keeps running, eventually making it up to Snorlax and hitting it hard with a scratch. Ash and gang were impressed, as the battle actually seemed to be going somewhere. Snorlax just wasn't yawning and then ending the battle immediately, and Snorlax decided to actually do a different strategy, as it fired multiple Hyper Beams, although Vigoroth was fast enough to dodge them all, but Snorlax still didn't give up, going back to its original yawn strategy. But Vigoroth just pops the pink yawn bubbles again, and it manages to rush up to Snorlax for the second time and knock it back with another scratch attack, nearly knocking it out, as Ash and the gang cheered for Vigoroth, although Snorlax was mad at how Vigoroth kept deflecting its yawns, and rose up immediately, although Vigoroth just pounded on its chest happily, and by doing this, it was able to focus enough to use Focus Energy to give it enhanced strength, but by the time it did this, Snorlax was already up in the air, about to land on Vigoroth, attempting to body slam it. Although Vigoroth quickly came up with a way to stop the body slam by using the energy it's gathered up with Focus Energy to go in for a Focus Punch, which pretty much leaves Snorlax fainted, just barely awake. Marcel saw that this was the best time to throw a Pokeball, and he did, successfully catching Snorlax, leading Marcel to jump up with joy as Vigoroth comes to him, and Marcel congratulates Vigoroth on the great battling. Just then, as Marcel was happily holding Vigoroth's Pokeball up in the sky, all the Slackoth that had been watching the battle from the bushes come out and thank Vigoroth and Marcel, hugging them both, congratulating them on their victory. Marcel started crying, happy that all of the Slackoth and Vigoroth really appreciated him, and Ash was amazed by the battle, while May notes how brave Vigoroth was to challenge Snorlax. A bit later, Ash and the gang then watched, very glad, as now that the Snorlax issue had been settled, Marcel had finally opened the gates, reopening the garden to the public, now having renamed it the Banana Slackoth and Vigoroth Garden in honor of Vigoroth helping him out, and he also added a Vigoroth to the entrance sign, not just a Slackoth. Much to Ash and the gang and Marcel's joy, people of all ages very soon came to the garden and enjoyed the bananas and Slackoth. Marcel wanted to do something to celebrate the reopening of the garden and to thank Ash and the gang for their help, so May asked if she could finally have a banana dessert, leading Marcel to bring out a gigantic cake with a whole bunch of layers and a Slackoth on top. Not a live Slackoth, but, like a cake-made Slackoth. May was instantly astounded by the cake, thanking Marcel greatly as she rushes over to the cake to eat it, leaving Brock, Ash, and Max behind, who thought that May was a little too excited over a cake. Brock then asked Marcel what he planned to do with the Snorlax now that he caught it, suggesting that he should put it to some use, and Marcel agreed, stating that he already had showing them a new room in the office, as he explains that he had made a new rest room since there were a lot of traveling tourists that came to the garden, so he figured he could make a room for people to take a nap, and he planned to let Snorlax hang out in this room and use its yawn to help the tourists fall asleep if they were having trouble falling asleep in somewhere that wasn't their own home. And he also planned to have it use yawn to help all the workers who stayed overnight fall asleep. Yeah, apparently there were some workers who worked at the place that we just didn't see all episode. Anyways, as Ash and the gang watched and saw that several tourists had already fallen asleep in little pods in the room, Brock noted that they would for sure wake up refreshed after a sleep induced by Snorlax's yawn, while Max was glad that Snorlax had a new home and could do something that wasn't disruptive. Marcel then thanked Ash and the gang for all their help as he escorted them out of his office, and Ash and the gang said goodbye to Marcel and his Vigoroth, continued on their journey to Lily Cove City. Hopefully, they were almost there. The episode then ends with one last scene from Team Rocket, who were still asleep in the bushes by some benches, dreaming about how they would look in their new uniforms that they would get when they gave Giovanni the Snorlax. And, we got to see their dream of what they thought their new uniforms would look like, although we didn't get to see them wake up and experience the inevitable disappointment they felt when they realized that they didn't actually steal Snorlax. But I have to say, James and Meowth and Jessie look pretty happy just sleeping right now. Hopefully they can sleep forever so they don't have to bother Ash and the gang anymore, but we know that's not going to happen.